So today I'm going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be reacting to a video that's been out for a couple of years by Adam Millard, the architect of games. This is a video that is basically devoted to discussing what exactly makes for a good deck builder. And it was influential in the creation and development of Aces and Adventures. So I just wanted to walk through it and say how some of the points made in the video influenced our design a bit.
For those who don't know, deck builders are games that give you a basic set of cards and task you with collecting new ones until you've constructed an entire deck that you can use to do normal gamey things like fight monsters, complete quests, or defend a magic demon train from a horde of celestial super beings. In the 6 years since DreamQuest came out, deck builders that built on its legacy like Slay the Spire, Dicey Dungeons, and Griftlands have seen a meteoric rise from relatively humble beginnings, and it seems like every day there's a new take on the genre coming out. Ratropolis is a deck building tower defense game, SteamWorld Quest is a deck-building traditional RPG, and Signs of the Sojourner is a deck-building visual novel.
I've actually played a deck builder golf game, a miniature golf game, so it lets you know that developers have tried to combine the kimchi, as I say, or hot dog of deck builders with the other thing, right? So let's say that the deck builder is the hot dog, and then we put the golf on top, that's the kimchi, or, in the case of like if you were going to make a farming game that was a deck builder, that would be the topping on the hot dog. We took a different approach. We're actually kind of working within the hot dog itself. You can say that the playing card aspect of Aces and Adventures is the kimchi on top, and it does function that way. It is a hook. So in that regard, it is like a spice. It's a type of hot dog. But we actually wanted to think about how the actual core mechanics of the deck builder could be improved.
And despite the fact that many of these games are quite similar, why can I just not stop playing them? Well, I think the answer to that is because deck builders are fantastic at stimulating our creativity and rewarding us for making dumb things work. In Monster Train, for example, I got my hands on this big boy called the Demon Fiend. I managed to reduce its cost with a relic, duplicate it a bunch of times, and then buff them to Kingdom Come to get an entire deck full of the damn things that cost half as much, and beat the tar out of basically every single enemy. It was completely game breaking. And that's sort of the point.
Yes, of course, I think that it's a lot of fun to have sort of game-breaking elements within a single-player game. Obviously, you can't really do that in multiplayer games. However, as a developer, you're trying to make it so that when somebody breaks the game, you're not really going to permanently ruin the game for yourself. In other words, if I have one strategy that is just clearly either superior to all other strategies or just makes any other strategy obsolete because you can easily demolish the game under all circumstances, the issue with that is it's kind of a terminal point for your creative pursuit of the game. I mean, yes, you can try to see if I can break the game in another way and another, but the impetus to do so is kind of disrupted by the fact that you've already beaten the heck out of the game, right? So that's something that I would always be careful, I try to be careful of as a developer, is to just try to make sure that whenever things are broken, they're broken either within small portions of the game, like you can destroy this level very easily, or within this run you became super powerful, but you can't always achieve the same thing.
After playing deck builders for, quite frankly, way too long, I think I've managed to come up with a set of 3 criteria that I think all well-designed deck builder card pools fall into. The cards need to enable synergies, they need to create interesting decisions as part of longer-term strategies, and they all need to have distinct identities. Let's start with that last one, because I picked its name purely on the basis of the rhyme, and it probably needs a bit of additional explanation.
So interestingly enough, I know that he picked identity there, probably as a joke, saying that it needed a lot more explanation, but I don't think that it does. I think that identity within a card is something that is absolutely integral, and as he said, is going to be one of the cornerstones that makes a deck builder fun. If you can deal 2 damage, or if you can deal 3 damage, or if you can deal 2 ice damage, or deal 2 fire damage, or if you can deal 1 damage now and 2 damage in the next turn. All of these things are different, but they lack a very strong and compelling identity. In other words, they're not very well differentiated from one another.
This can be seen really clearly in the design of SteamWorld Quest, a deck-building RPG where your players kill robots. We've got Book Bash, Electrolyze, and Flame Lash. All of these cards fulfill the same basic function more or less, to deal a small amount of damage for free, but they go about it in different ways, leading to different tactical options. Book Bash does low damage, but lowers the magic power of the target, meaning that it fits well into a defensive playstyle. Electrolyze lets you draw cards next turn, which means it can be great for helping to set up a combo, and Flame Lash can do a lot of damage, but it's reliant on you lucking out and setting the enemy on fire to reach its maximum potential. Because these cards all have their own unique quirks you've got to build around, they create much more tactically stimulating gameplay than a generic, do some damage I guess, spell.
Even though I understand what he's trying to drive at there, I actually think that the distinctions between those cards are just the bottom line. You know, it's like that's the base amount that I would qualify as a card having its own identity. In other words, if I'm doing, let's say, like I said, 1 damage now, or if I'm doing 1 damage with a tiny little effect later, like a dot or a debuff or something like this, it's just the very first step in identity. However, I think that if you're trying to make a game in which all of the cards are basically your attacks, so in other words, I have to attack, I have to deal damage in some way, that's going to be something that creates a lot of cards that have very similar patterns. What we did with Aces and Adventures to get rid of that problem altogether is we don't have a basic attack card. There's no such thing as I'm just going to attack. Yes, of course, we have a chop card or like a shuriken or something like that, which does deal damage. But that's actually like an ability in this game. It's not the baseline. You're not going to always chop. You're not always going to throw a shuriken as a base for your turn. You actually are going to throw an attack using simply your mana cards, which in this case are playing cards, which of course you can form poker hands. So you can throw a single, you can throw a pair, you can throw a triple, 4 of a kind, or 5-card poker hands like straights, flushes, and full houses. So by doing that, we actually eliminated the need for all of the basic attack cards. We can still include them. The mage uses cards like in a more traditional way, but now that's a flavor. So now the mage, which plays like a traditional game where you're throwing a fireball or a firebolt or an ice bolt or things like this, and they all have different effects, like whether they're tapping or just damaging or AoE. These are things that are now a flavor instead of just the core mechanic of the game. So that's how we approach the problem of identity, is that by freeing up the attack, the basic just 1-to-1 that basically must be done on every turn, we open up all of these possibilities.
We can see the consequences of generic card design in Slay the Spire. The game is normally really good at giving each card, besides the crappy starter ones you want to get rid of, interesting effects. But that means that when a card comes along that doesn't really have its own identity...
But see, there you go. So why is it that you needed to have these basic cards to basically have no identity? It's because that's the backbone of the game. That's the baseline of the game. Deal damage, defend yourself, heal, whatever it might be. These are just the core mechanics of the game. And if you have no other way of interacting with those core mechanics and you still need to basically play the game, you need to have this as your more or less like the canvas that you're then going to be able to decorate with a bunch of different modifiers on these base effects.
It struggles to stick out or feel like it would meaningfully contribute to your deck, even if it's actually quite useful. Leap is a card for the defect class that's essentially a straight upgrade on your basic block card. However, it has no interesting effects beyond this boosted efficiency. This card is boring and has no features that make it stand out, so I end up glossing over it every time, in spite of the fact that for a common card, it's actually quite powerful, even if it does make you play in a boring way.
So there, what you could look at it as is that this character is got a strength because its base is now this card. And so by the fact that this block is now better than the normal block, what you can actually say is the character just has enhanced block. And it's being manifested through the fact that these cards are just flatly an upgrade.
Mechanical theme, a great way to get cards to stick in a player's mind, as well as get them thinking about potential uses, is through what's called flavor, which is to say, the aesthetic and thematic design of the cards.
I do disagree with the way that flavor is spelled.
Take this card for example, the Alpine Houndmaster. This is a card with a whopping 8 lines of rules text and 2 completely distinct effects. It's a lot for a new player to remember. Luckily, the Magic designers have made this card much easier to get your head around by turning it into a little bit of a story. See, this guy is a Houndmaster. That means he likes dogs, So when you play him, he searches your deck for a dog to accompany him on his adventures, and he gets stronger whenever they attack together. The 2 specific cards he searches for are even pictured in the card art. Look, there they are, 2 dogs. Rather than having to remember a bunch of complicated rules, all new players really have to do is be on the lookout for those specific doggos in their draft packs, as well as dogs in general.
Yes, you're going to try to make sure that thematically, that the artwork and the name fits whatever it is that the thing does. But the thing that's actually cool about Magic the Gathering for me is the arcanity of it, if that's even a word, right? So the sort of scholarly approach that you have to have of poring over a bunch of cards and wondering like what all of the permutations and combinations of decks that you can come up with. So the fact that something is very obvious, like here's a card that you want 2 dogs for, put 2 dogs or 4 dogs in your deck and make sure that you do that, is actually not really, for me at least, the draw of Magic the Gathering. The draw of Magic the Gathering for me is like, yes, I want to make like a spore deck with some funguses or whatever and a lot of counters and stuff. And so I might have a themed deck for that purpose, almost for role-playing sake. But for me, it was like the unexpected combinations of things that you'd throw at your friends to surprise them, you know? Can you replicate that? I mean, as an indie dev, I don't think so, because basically people aren't going to give you the time to do that. If I told you, hey, I have this really complicated card game where you have to read a library of cards, and even then you're only starting to maybe have an idea of what it is that you can do with these cards, you're going to say like, no thanks, I've got Magic the Gathering and I don't trust you as some random indie dev for me to spend 5 days, 6 days, who knows how long, just getting the hang of understanding what I could do. So as an indie dev, you don't really want to do that. You want to focus in on making things, as he said, a little bit more intelligible. But that is not really the case for classic Magic the Gathering, in my experience.
As far as deck builders are concerned, I think synergies come in 3 flavors: hard, soft, and flex. The first type of synergy would be what I'd call hard synergies. These are synergistic effects which have plainly stated benefits to being matched with specific keywords or types of cards, and no other potential deck building scope outside of that. In Hearthstone, for example, Murlocs are pretty crappy on their own, but they make other Murlocs stronger. So the more Murlocs you have, the Murlocier they get, encouraging you to focus entirely on this single type of card. Hard synergy cards can be great for giving players a foundation to build their deck around, or as a fun gimmick. But if a game has too many cards with hard synergies, deck building can quickly become something of a formality. Another type of synergy will be what I call soft synergy, where cards have implied relationships with other cards, but the player is left to figure out the best use for them. Soft synergies encourage players to evaluate the interplay between their cards and rewards them for finding interesting connections. The third and final type of synergy is a flex synergy. Rather than gaining increased effects when paired with other cards, flex synergies are all about having versatile effects that either make it easier to execute an existing synergy or support one indirectly. Oftentimes, flex synergy cards can be bad or outright useless on their own, but it's when paired with other synergies that they really shine. In Monster Train, cards have 3 rarities: common, uncommon, and rare.
I've always loved the distinction between uncommon and rare, right? I mean, we've used it before. It's just funny because it basically means the same thing.
Razor Sharp Edge is an example of a soft synergy card. It gives a big boost to a card's attack and a small penalty to their health, and is basically nice to have. But it really shines when used on a creature that attacks multiple times, like the Animus of Will. Uncommon cards offer flex synergies, like this one, the Wickless Baron, who's a bit rubbish on his own, but supports a variety of sacrifice or resurrection focused decks because he gets stronger whenever something dies.
Alright, so let's talk about synergies, because I think that this is possibly the most important part of the whole video. I know we talked about identity, and identity is super crucial as well, just to make sure that the game feels rich. But synergies is really where the game is at and where the deck builder's at, because if you look at a deck as a sort of spec in another game, well, now you have, in our case, 30 slots to spec your character, your deck. And so that is going to basically demand for you to try, if you're trying to make a better deck, that's the whole point, try for you to figure out how these cards are going to work in relationship to one another, right? And that's default for all deck builders pretty much. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions out there, but that's the core premise of a deck builder, is just how do these cards play with one another? That's how good this deck is. Now another RPG, like an MMORPG, like World of Warcraft, you might be a warlock, you might light a guy on fire, you immolate him or whatever, and then you conflagurate him to explode him, do the direct damage. That is a form of a hard synergy. It's a combo. But here you're able to create these more nuanced sort of relationships, because it's not, I have 8 abilities, I'm always going to hit my number 2 ability and my number 4 ability, and then I go number 3 ability. Here you don't know which way you're going to draw them. So you have to not just plan for synergies, but make sure that they're adaptive, so that if you've drawn in this order or in that order, you're going to play them out differently, and they're going to have different synergistic effects. Now, normally a deck builder is kind of limited in their synergies by having to add a lot of mechanics on top of their base mechanics of deal damage, heal damage, defend, whatever it might be, because there's nothing else to do. You've got an enemy here and they've got damage or they've got HP. So you're either trying to mitigate them dealing damage to you, or you're trying to deal damage to their HP. What else are you going to do, right? So yes, now you start adding a whole bunch of different things like status effects and special conditions. But these are additional rules that you're just stacking on top of it. And every game does it. We do it. We have these, key terms like a guardian, not new, right? So guard, you must attack the enemy with guard first. That's in like almost every deck builder. But what we have and what we tried to bring to the table is the concept of the suits and the values. So now you have suits and you have values with every card. And you have them presented in a somewhat intuitive way, right? Because you have a playing card deck. And if you have ever played any game with a playing card deck, you at least understand that there are, and unfortunately not everyone has, I haven't discovered that the hard way, but you have the values going from 2 to ace, and you have the 4 suits. So now what that permits you to do is have an effect that only interacts with 1 suit. I deal an extra point of damage with a spade card, or I take 1 point less damage from heart cards. So these are automatically differentiating factors that give identity and also result in synergy, right? Because now if I take 1 less point from a heart card, if I wild a suit coming in, like the attack is coming in with a spade, but I wild it into a heart and I take 1 less point from hearts, well, all of a sudden, I'm taking 1 less point. Now, there's also mana cost on these cards. So because there is mana cost and they're almost always linked to a suit, not always, that means that if I have an ability which is going to deal an extra point of damage with a spade, right? It's a buff for my character. I deal 1 extra point of damage with spades, but it costs me a spade to activate. Well, that's just basically deteriorating the value of that buff because I've used a spade to cast it, and I've reduced the number of spades in my deck until I have to reshuffle. If I used a heart to cast it instead, let's say that it's a different ability, then now I know that all of the abilities which require hearts, or if I had an ability which does something special with hearts, those abilities are not going to play as synergistically well because I'm consuming a heart in order to do it. And we've locked the amount of, well, not we, but whoever created playing cards way back in the day, they locked the number of suits or the number of cards per suit that are going to be in every deck. And so we're just kind of piggybacking off of that and hopefully people's existing knowledge of that. So in essence, Aces and Adventures allows you to very, very easily generate identity and synergy between cards. It's almost impossible to not have some kind of a synergistic or anti-synergistic effect based on the fact that we know which cards you have. It's reliable that you're always going to draw these cards. And we know what this card costs, and we know what effect it has on these cards. So you get a lot of soft synergy that way. You get a lot of flex synergy that way. And we also, of course, include a little bit of hard synergy. So for instance, like if you have a tapped enemy, you bop them on the head, right, with another card, and it does extra damage to a tapped enemy. However, you don't have to tap them with a different ability. You could have moved yourself on the other side of them in the turn order, and if they went before you, they're tapped by the time it's your turn, and then you can bop them on the head with that ability. So for us, we always take the approach of not trying to create one card to work with another card to create a combo. We try to give you tools that are going to piece together in a way that is going to produce some kind of desirable result, a synergy.
Longer term, more strategic challenges are also key to making deck builders work. If all you were doing is matching up synergistic cards whenever you saw them, not only would your deck probably suck, but it also wouldn't feel like you were making tangible, meaningful choices or progressing towards some sort of end goal. Their cards need to work as part of a strategy. A very simple way to add some longer term decision making to a deck builder is to require players to manage not just their cards, but also their deck. The bigger your deck is, insert penis joke here, the less likely you are to draw into your important combo pieces or flex synergy cards when you need them. It's a common new player mistake to pick up every single card that's vaguely synergistic wherever possible and end up with a bloated, useless deck.
Yeah, I remember going to my first Magic the Gathering tournaments with a rainbow deck of like 80 cards, right? And just showing up like super proud. I've got my rainbow deck, 80 cards, 120 cards, whatever it was, and just bam, laying it down the table. You know, there's like probably, and I was a teenager at the time, probably like 14, 15, maybe 16 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. And you got this like 30-some-year-old guy sitting across from me and just kind of like, you know, feeling sorry, like going like, hey, little buddy, like you wanna like pick a couple of colors maybe, or you want to just take a few out? And I was like, nah, this is great. I have all of the best cards. So yeah, that was a harsh lesson learned right on my first tournament there is you got to pick which cards you're going to go with. So this kind of strategy you get for free in a deck builder, right? It's hard to prevent it if you're allowing people to build their own deck. This kind of strategy you get for free, but we're going to get into a different kind of strategy here.
By letting players upgrade their cards to be more powerful, or gain a variety of extra effects, you can let them invest into their star players and better orient their strategy around particular cards that perform well.
The thing that I find interesting about the way single player deck builders kind of play out is when you have a multiplayer approach where you're dueling with somebody, you do need to worry about flexibility, I guess, adaptability, how resilient your deck is to another strategy. But in terms of something like Aces and Adventures, where you have these parceled out challenges in campaigns and they're reliable, you know what kind of challenge is going to be presented by a campaign after you've played it. You can actually design decks specifically for the purpose of beating that campaign. So in essence, you're not really so much worried about creating flexibility in your deck. You're actually just worried about maximizing the efficiency of the deck and how well you can execute a specific strategy with that deck to overcome the challenge. Now, that's going to change a little bit if we're able to do the procedural campaigns, which I hope we will. That's going to be different because obviously you don't know what you're getting into. The procedural campaign will be different every time. So you'll be able to see ahead a little bit, perhaps. We'll talk about that here in a second. But you will not be able to craft a deck specifically to beat the challenge of this procedural campaign because it's going to be different next time you play it.
In Slay the Spire, rest spots have two functions by default. You can have a nap and heal some health, or you can upgrade a card. Just like I mentioned earlier, upgrading a card allows you to focus your deck and make it stronger in the long run.
So yeah, we of course have that in Aces and Adventures. You can level up or you can rest at most post-combat nodes.
But you might die if you don't have enough health. This allows new players to recover from mistakes and play it safe, while also letting expert players min-max everything to ride the razor's edge for an extra challenge. In Dominion, you play as a medieval merchant/landowner, and the aim of the game is to get more points than the other players by buying these victory cards. To do that, you have to build up a money-making engine by using cards from this central market, which usually aren't worth any points but enable you to afford the provinces and duchies. The thing is though, is that those victory cards don't actually do anything, so the more of them you buy, the worse your deck gets as it gets clogged up. Choosing when to go for the win and start buying victory cards is a massive part of the game's strategy.
So there, I mean, strategy is actually a part of almost any deck builder, almost any RPG. You can even just talk about a simple Final Fantasy sort of thing where you just have potions or healing and you can deal damage. So the same kind of thing can be applied here. It's like, am I buffing up? Am I taking time to actually attack? Am I healing now? Do I want to get one more attack in or risk a spell that costs like, 2 turns to cast or something like this? So you have this kind of strategy pretty much in almost all games. Dominion is a great example because it's so long like the gameplay, it takes such a long time that you can actually just see those micro decisions, which are normally just turn-to-turn stuff, expressed over a longer period of time. But one of the things that we're trying to do with our procedural mode, if we're able to create it, is to give you a look ahead so that you can see, similar to something like Slay the Spire, which direction you're going to go. You're going to be able to choose this fight or this fight, which will lead you to this type of item, or here you'll be able to level, etc., etc. So you'll be able to look ahead and know what challenges you want to take and what rewards you can potentially choose from those challenges.
Let's recap. Deck builders are very complicated. I've given a pretty basic overview of deck and card mechanics here, but I've barely even touched on progression systems, enemy design, multiplayer, or anything like that. But a good rule of thumb for trying to understand why we enjoy a particular deck builder more than the others can be found in that trifecta of identity, synergy, and strategy. You need to ask yourself, how distinct are the cards, how fun are they to put together, and how interesting are they to manage? Through these lenses, we can better articulate our feelings on some games and understand why they make us feel the way they do.
All right, so that concludes the video. As you can see, I think that the core message here of identity, synergy, and strategy is absolutely solid advice for any developer of, I'm going to say, an RPG. I don't know that you need to limit it to just deck builders. The way that abilities and specs and your development of your character all interplay off one another, it's just a good lesson for any developer of an RPG. So that's basically it. I just wanted to respond to this video because it was one that we watched as we were developing Aces and Adventures and helped shape some of it. Thankfully, these are some of the things that we had already started up on even way back in the day in 2013 or whatever it was when we first started with Dungeons and Deuces. It's definitely something that helped us make sure that we were on the right path and that people out there, not just us working in a bubble, would appreciate some of the things that we're doing. I hope that maybe at some point Adam might see Aces and Adventures, and I would look forward to hearing what he thinks about it. But what do you think about it? Do you think that we're hitting these points? Do you agree or disagree with Adam or myself? Let me know in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if you haven't. I will be talking more about game development, playing indie games, some pop-up dungeon Let's Plays, and of course I'll be covering some MMORPGs like Ashes of Creation and things like that I've been really getting into. So, yep, please like, subscribe, follow, all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.